Okay. So welcome everybody. It's good to see you all. And as I said, there are a number of people that I don't know. So I don't know if there are people here who don't have a practice. I want to make very clear that this class on basics of Buddhism is not an introduction to practice. What it is it's an introduction to the basic vocabulary, or some of the basic vocabulary and I guess you could say ideas that are common to all Buddhist traditions. And an analogy would be if you're interested in Christianity, then you need to know about Jesus. What different Christian churches say about Jesus can be quite different. So if you're giving an introduction to basic Christianity, you'll say very basic things about Jesus, like that his mother was Mary and his earthly father was Joseph and stuff, and he was crucified. You'll say stuff like that, but you won't go into details about things like the Trinity and the nature of the Trinity, because that's things that different groups disagree on. So we're going to take that same approach. We're going to talk about just some, very significant some, but just some of the basic concepts and the basic vocabulary that all Buddhist practitioners refer to. Um, we will occasionally talk about what the Zen tradition, because that's the tradition I'm in, what the Zen tradition, their view on this, but we'll try to focus more on the sort of the general things that everyone would agree on. If you dove deeply into the readings, especially Wikipedia, you notice that they were very, very heavy on the Theravada tradition, because the Theravada tradition is the one in which these teachings are most prominent. I don't know what the word is: teachings, ideas, concepts, vocabulary. It's hard to know what the right word is. But anyway, they're very prominent in Theravada. And so the Wikipedia articles emphasize the Theravada approach even more than the Theravada monks book, What the Buddha Taught. While Polo Rahula was a Theravada monk and a great scholar, and doesn't get deeply into the Theravada weeds the way Wikipedia does. So if you did all that reading, I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about that stuff very little, because that's not what we're about. So that's sort of a kind of basic introduction to what we're doing here. I asked people to read two very short suttas. One is the sutta is the Pali for sutra. Sutra is the Sanskrit for sutta, right? Sort of scripture. So the fire sermon was the thing about this is burning, this is burning, this is burning, this is burning, this is burning. Let's get out of the burning. Okay, that's the fire sermon. And the reason I asked you to do it is because it incorporates a number of the ideas that we're talking about: the six senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, which actually are not on the list, but they're fundamental, and I should talk about them. The three poisons: desire, anger, ignorance. Some of the 12 links of the chain of dependent origination, which is not, I didn't ask you to look at that. That's like another course, but it's very fundamental. A sort of a reconstruction of the Four Noble Truths. So that's why I asked you to read the fire sermon. And then the Wheel of Dhamma. Dhamma is the Pali for the Sanskrit Dharma. Dharma is the Sanskrit for the Pali Dhamma, okay? And the Wheel of Dhamma is supposedly the first sermon in which Buddha elucidated the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So that's why I asked you to read those. And where did I put your questions? Okay. So let me remind you what these are. So the Four Noble Truths is basically we suffer. In fact, suffering is intrinsic to existence. Here's why we suffer: desire, anger, ignorance. It doesn't have to be that way. And here's how to change it. And generally, here's how to change it is follow the Eightfold Path. I should say that in Zen, the way to change it is to practice. But anyway, the Eightfold Path. What is the Eightfold Path? The Eightfold Path is, it's usually translated as right view, right thought, etc. But I prefer correct. I think correct is a better translation. Correct view, correct thought or intention, correct speech, correct action, correct livelihood, correct effort, correct mindfulness, correct meditation. And there'll be time to talk later more about these. The 3 marks of existence. That is, everything that exists has these marks. The first is suffering. The second is impermanence. And the third is non-self. And again, I'm just stating these. We'll talk about these more later. Then there's the 6 paramitas, or sort of virtues: generosity, ethics, patience, effort, meditation, and wisdom. And notice I keep having to look at my notes. I never can remember these things. But anyway, there we go. The 5 desires: food, sleep, money, sex, and fame, which doesn't mean being famous. It means wanting to be liked. The 3 poisons: desire, anger, and ignorance. So that's what I asked you to look at. And then I didn't ask you to look at, but I will mention, and maybe this will be a class later because this is something that takes forever to talk about, the 12 links in the chain of dependent origination: ignorance, mental formations, sometimes Zen Master Sung-san refers to this as karma, consciousness, name and form, 6 senses, contact, sensation, desire or clinging, existence, life, old age, suffering, and death. So the idea is ignorance gives rise to mental formations, which gives rise to consciousness, which gives rise to name and form, which gives, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to talk about that any more than what I just said, except to say that this is extremely complex, and maybe we might have a class on that some other time. The 5 skandhas come into a lot of the discussion of this, and they come into the Heart Sutra, so I will mention them. There's form, which means physical shape. There's feeling, which does not mean feelings, it means sensation. There's perception, which means, oh, this is a cup, oh, this is a chair, that kind of thing. There's impulses, which is the impulse to act, not being impulsive, but, oh, I'm going to pick up my glass of water. And then consciousness. So those are the 5 skandhas. So that's sort of the basic list of things that are common. And there are other things, but these are the basic things that are common to all Buddhist practices. And I should pause here and let me... Your questions are wonderful, but they tend to be very specialized. So I'm going to get to them as we, after I finish what I want to say to my prepared thing. So I want to talk about the Eightfold Path a little bit. So the Eightfold Path is traditionally, it lists 8 human qualities, which if you have these qualities, that leads to liberation. And the word that I'm translating is correct, is samyag in Sanskrit, and the Korean pronunciation is samyak. And if you look in our chant, those of you familiar with our chants, you'll notice the word samyak comes up quite a bit. And it can be translated as correct, complete, perfect, or right. And I like the correct translation here. So you have correct view. And view doesn't mean, oh, I'm looking in this direction or that direction. It means point of view. So seeing reality for what it is. So that's what view means. It means if you're familiar with something called standpoint epistemology, the idea is that everyone has a view of the world that's shaped by their standpoint, that is their sort of socioeconomic whatever nexus. So that's the sense of view, and the idea is correct view means seeing things exactly as they are. And then the second one is sometimes correct thought or correct intention, and it does have this property of sort of goal or direction. It's not thought in the sense of mathematics. It's thought in the sense of intention, goal, the way our thoughts shape our actions. So that's the second one. And these, the first two, view and intention, are generally put together. There's generally a way of dividing these into three sorts of categories, and these two are put together as sort of the mental categories. And then you have the action ones. You have speech, correct action, and I notice in my notes that karmanta is the Sanskrit for action, and you'll notice that karma is part of the word karmanta. So, okay, so correct speech, correct action, and then correct livelihood. You know, what do you do for a living, or what do you do? Not everyone has a job, but sort of livelihood. You know, what do you do during your day? And there's a lot of disagreement about what correct livelihood means. Like, if you're in the army, is that automatically not correct livelihood? You know, there's a lot of stuff about that, and people can argue about that. In Zen, the general attitude is that, you know, we say good and evil have no self-nature. So even if you're in the army, you can make that correct by the way you perform as a person in the army. You can make that correct. You can make any situation correct, which is not saying you go out and kill a whole bunch of people and say, oh, it's correct. If you have a deep understanding of what is and who you are and how you relate to this universe, then you can make any situation correct. That's sort of the Zen approach. But, you know, Zen teachers don't get into arguments about which professions are right livelihood. Other parts of Buddhism do. But anyway, so we have correct speech, correct action, correct livelihood, and those are the three lumped together as kind of action. And then you have effort, mindfulness. I almost said mindlessness. Effort, mindfulness, and a word that's translated either as concentration or meditation. And the effort here is the practice effort. It's not effort, you know, like you're really digging at those weeds. That's not that kind of effort. It's the effort of your mind, your mind effort to focus and be completely present. So that effort, and the effort, you know, to practice, to really keep your practice strong when you're practicing. So sort of the practice ones: effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And the concentration is not purposeful concentration, like when you're playing piano or writing a poem or, you know, cooking a meal. It's meditation concentration, this sort of highly focused hyper-awareness that happens when you're meditating, not this focused thing that has a kind of goal at its end. And I'll say something about the Zen approach to all of these. The Zen approach is that correct view means no view. That is, you're not imposing a view on the world. You're completely open. And correct intention is no intention. That is, you're not imposing your intention on whatever is going on. You're completely connected to it, so that your intention is somehow, it's not even necessary. It's just, you're just completely acting. I hate the phrase in the moment, but you're completely acting, completely appropriately with whatever is going on around you. So we would go through all of those. Correct livelihood is no livelihood. Correct meditation is no meditation, which doesn't mean you don't meditate. It means when you're meditating, you're not like, whoa, I'm meditating, you know? So that's just, you know, it's just, you just completely 100% do it. So you're not even thinking about what you're doing. And you're not you're not thinking, oh, look at what I'm doing. That's completely gone, you know? So that's sort of the Zen approach. It's kind of a dissoluteness approach. Um, so let's see. I wanted to say something about the three marks of existence. So this is a very basic Theravada teaching, and it's 3/4 of a very basic Mahayana teaching. So I hope everyone knows that Buddhism sort of breaks down into Theravada, which is basically Southeast Asian Buddhism, you know, Thailand, Myanmar, places like that, Sri Lanka. Mahayana Buddhism, which is basically Northeast Asia, Vietnam, China, Korea, Japan. The transmission of Buddhism was India to China to Korea to Japan as far as Mahayana goes, and then from China to Thailand. Sorry, Vietnam. Thailand is Theravada, but Vietnam is Mahayana, and then Tibetan Buddhism is a sort of offshoot, but very special offshoot, really separate from Mahayana, although many Tibetan Buddhists call themselves Mahayana, and it's usually referred to as Vajrayana. So there's these three types of Buddhism that are geographically sort of identified, but of course now everything is everywhere. You go to Sri Lanka, you can find Tibetan Buddhism, and if you go to Tibet, you can find Theravada Buddhism. I mean, everything's everywhere now. But anyway, the three marks of existence, what this is doing is this is describing the nature of existence not as a physicist would, but as a philosopher would. So everything arises, everything sticks around for a while and then disappears. So that's impermanence. All experience is marked by suffering, dukkha, and that's the first noble truth. And all those suffering, impermanent things actually aren't really things. That is, they have no self-nature. This is where the 5 skandhas come in. Skandha means heaps. So what we think we are is just these heaps. You know, the heap of form, the heap of feelings, you know, sensations, the heap of etc., you know. So and if you think about how human bodies work, you know, that's really true. I mean, you know, you study like microbiology and stuff like that, and we really are like a heap of a whole bunch of little things running around doing their thing. And you know, sometimes one of them decides to turn into a cancer, and you know, sometimes one of them decides to attack another one, and you know, you get all this stuff going on. So this notion of no self nature, that there isn't like this hard marble that we can say is Judy or Lisa or Rusty. I'm just calling names as they appear on a screen, right? This no self nature. So and what these 3 marks of existence counter is the common human delusions that we're not going to disappear. We're going to have, somehow we're going to have eternal life, and we'll be recognizably ourselves in this eternal life. And so we're not going to disappear. Suffering is a mistake. You know, what's wrong that I'm suffering? You know, if this world worked the way it's supposed to work, I wouldn't be suffering. Why am I suffering? I'm a good person. I shouldn't be suffering, right? So the suffering is a mistake, and that we have some kind of permanent essence. So these 3 human delusions, we're not going to disappear. Everything's impermanent. Suffering is a cosmic mistake. No, suffering is the nature of existence. We have some kind of permanent essence. No, we don't. And then Mahayana teaching adds an even more fundamental concept, which is emptiness. And you can see emptiness as the 4th in this list, or you can see it as the thing that these other things are manifestations of. And this is a huge subject, and I'm not going to talk about emptiness because that's not part of this class. But I do want to tell you a funny story. So my teacher, Zen Master Sung-san, he was once giving a talk, and I wasn't there. I read about this later. He was once giving a talk, and um, somebody said to him, since everything is impermanent, and he stopped the person immediately. He said, "Where did you hear that? Everything is originally emptiness." So that's kind of the Mahayana, view of these things. Okay, so that's the 3 marks of existence. And then you have the, I already talked about the 6 paramitas. Okay, so that's the end of my notes. And now I can get to your questions. There they are. Nope. I just had them. What did I do with them? There we go. Okay. And please, if you have any more questions, please ask. Okay.
I have a question about the eightfold path, and you said the first 2 are mental, the next 3 are action, and then I didn't catch if you said what.
Practice.
Oh,
Practice.
practice.
Yeah. Gosh, people are taking notes. Okay. So this is an interesting question. Yeah. I don't know if you want me to identify you. I won't identify you. But anyway, this is an interesting question. Person who asked this question. Very cool question. So this person read the section in the Compass of Zen, which covers a lot of this material. This is by Zen Master Sung-san. And I had said, well, if you have the energy, read the chapter on, unfortunately, he calls it Hinayana instead of Theravada. Hinayana means lesser vehicle, and Mahayana means greater vehicle. So it's very insulting to call it the Hinayana. But for, at least 1,500 years, Mahayana Buddhists called it Hinayana. And we're trying to be nice and not do that because, it's not lesser. It's just different. Anyway, so the Hinayana Buddhism starts with 3 insights into impermanence, impurity, and non-self. You wrote importance, impurity, and non-self, by the way. That's an interesting typo. Impermanence, impurity, and non-self. And then the 3 seals of existence and the 3 marks of existence. What are the 3 seals of existence? Aren't these all? Well, 3 seals of existence, aren't they the same? The 3 marks? I have to look it up. Yeah. So what's going on here? So this impurity. So the impermanence and non-self are in the 3 marks of existence, right? But impurity is not. Instead, we have suffering. And so these 3 insights are different from the 3 seals. I think that the seals and the marks are the same. It's like you have insight into impermanence, and you have insight into impurity. And Theravada Buddhism makes a really big deal about impurity, and Mahayana Buddhism does not, and Zen definitely does not. So Zen is part of the Mahayana. So you want a kind of so I guess you could say that maybe suffering is caused by impurity or something like that, but suffering it's just everywhere, You can't get rid of it. But impurity is something you can try to get rid of. So I think that there's a little difference there, And if you read Theravada teachers, they will talk a lot about purity and impurity and avoiding impurity and being pure. This is a really big deal in Theravada Buddhism. So these three insights, that means you come to an understanding of impermanence, you come to an understanding of impurity, you come to an understanding of non-self. And we need to talk more about non-self, but I'm going to wait on that for a minute. Is Buddhism a religion? I think so. How do you define religion? And other people, like the person asking this question, don't think so. So how do you define a religion? And you can practice Buddhism and think of it as a religious practice, and you can practice Buddhism and think of it as a spiritual practice, and you can practice Buddhism and think of it as none of the above. You can do whatever you want. These are just names we give to things. So for tax purposes, the Kansas Zen Center is definitely a religion. We practice Buddhism, and Buddhism is religion because otherwise we have to pay taxes. But other than that, I don't see really the necessity for somebody to declare that something is a religion or is not a religion. That's okay. Here's an interesting. So the 6 paramitas. So we have energy and effort, and we also have energy and effort on the Eightfold Path. And how are these different? And I'm not so sure that they are. Why should they be different? So that's all I'll say about that. I'm going to skip the next question because I want to go back to it later. And then we have this line from the reading: impermanent things actually aren't really things. That is, they have no self-nature. So that goes back to no self-nature. And again, I'm going to wait and talk about no self-nature later. And then in the fire sermon, the line, through dispassion, he, that is the person who practices dispassion, is fully released. And what is meant by dispassion? So not reading Pali, I'm not sure, but I would imagine that this is fairly close to what in Zen we call non-attachment. In Mahayana Buddhism generally we call non-attachment. But I could be wrong because I don't practice Theravada Buddhism and I don't speak Pali or read Pali. But there's this notion, and here I can only talk from the Zen perspective, there's this notion that the goal is to somehow not have any feelings, not, to not take pleasure, to not experience pain. That's not the point. The point is not to attach to it. So there's a beautiful sunset. You can enjoy that sunset, but the sun's eventually going to go below the horizon and won't be there. Then you can't enjoy that sunset. Then if your mind is stuck in that sunset, then you can't see what's around you. So that's what non-attachment means. Non-attachment, which I'm imagining this is what dispassion means, but as I said, I don't really know because I don't study Theravada Buddhism. Non-attachment does not mean not having pleasure, not having pain, not having happiness, not having sadness. That's not what it means. Those things arise naturally. It means not clinging to them. That's what it means. So that's how I would think of the fire sermon. That we're burning because we keep getting stuck to things. And that if we could get unstuck, then we would no longer be burning. So that's but as I said, I'm not a Theravada, scholar. I'm not a scholar of Theravada Buddhism. I'm certainly not a Theravada practitioner. So, but I wanted to make very clear that there is no goal of sort of turning into a block of wood where you have no sensations, no inner sensations. That's not the point. The point is not to get stuck. Here's a great question. Without desire, how can we live our life? So again, the word desire, so it's the stickiness of it that's the problem. So it's when we're so obsessed by, like you go to a restaurant, back when people used to go to restaurants, maybe some of you are still going to restaurants, you go to a restaurant and there's this one dish you really love and they're out of it, and then you can't enjoy your dinner because all you can think of it is this one dish that you really love, and they don't have it anymore, So that's the kind of desire we're talking about. But, I'm thirsty and I desire some water. That's fine. I don't even know if that counts, if you want to call that desire. It's just, right? I look at the menu and I want this and I want that, and there it is on the menu. I order it if I can afford it. That's no problem. But it's the stickiness.
Judy, I know this is Jen. I asked that question. Yeah. I know it's not in the spirit of this sort of teaching to get a little wrapped around word choice, but I did notice that you say, I prefer correct instead of right as we go through Eightfold Path. So is there a word that might make sense in terms of kind of like an urge to do something that if I accomplish it, I'm happy, but if I don't accomplish it, I don't fall apart, versus, something that's like an unhealthy urge that's sticky. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I know it's like not so Buddhist to do that, but it helps me keep it in my brain in a way that's helpful for guidance as I walk through life. Thank you.
So don't make Buddhist and not Buddhist.
Fair enough.
Words are important. That's why I like to say correct speech instead of right speech. Okay?
Okay. Fair enough.
Because words are important. And I don't know. I have no idea, maybe someone can think of another word. But yeah.
Judy, you just started to say because right speech. I think you were going to explain why you choose the word correct rather than right, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because right sounds like it's a checklist. Sounds like the answer in the back of the book. Whereas correct is more situational.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah. If you say right view, then you can argue about what is the right view. If you say correct view, well, you can still argue what is the correct view, but it's a little more open. It gives you the sense of, it might be correct here, and then something else might be correct there. So that's why. Although fundamentally, correct view is no view, and then you can't argue about that. But anyway. But yeah, so getting back to Jen's question about desire, I don't know, and let's see, do I have notes on what the Sanskrit is? I think I do. Where are they? Oh, maybe I don't. No, I think I don't. Yeah, I don't know what the Sanskrit is for desire. And my husband is he can't answer because he's got his sound off, so we don't conflict there. But
what about the traditional word of craving?
Yeah, craving is good. Thank you very much, Carol, to the rescue. Yeah. Okay, great. Let's do craving instead of desire and make desire less necessary. Thank you very much. Okay, there we go. All right. Let's see, what other questions? The difference between impermanence, no self, and emptiness. So this is really huge. And people really disagree with that. A dear friend who is a teacher in our school says that emptiness is the same as impermanence. And there's a case to be made that no self is because of impermanence. I mean, you can make a logical conclusion that way. There's these are pointing to different things, and these pointings are this is really the inadequacy of words to capture what really is going on. So impermanence is pointing out that everything is always changing. And so you say everything is always changing, and then you can ask, well, what everything? So what is this thing? So that means that impermanence alone, there's something left out. And then you say no self, not a little, hard marble of self running around. So even this glass of water, what makes it a glass of water? And you break it down and you say, well, the water's in the glass is separate from the water. The glass is made up of certain kind of molecules that are in a certain kind of configuration. And I don't know if you've ever lived in a house with windows that are made of very old glass, very old windows, like a house that's like 100 years old. And the glass actually sort of deforms. And the light is not let in evenly. It's a really interesting thing, an optical thing. So glass itself is like a kind of a liquid. It doesn't stay still, So you have this kind of interesting molecular structure of the glass, and you have the molecular structure of the water, and you have all these things, and these molecules are made up of atoms, and these atoms, and you can go on and on like that. So there's no self, you can, if you break this glass, it's not a glass any longer, right? A Mahayana Buddhist would say our minds made this glass. This glass is not intrinsically a glass, our minds make it a glass. It's a concept that humans have. A fish might not see it as a glass, a frog might not see it as a glass, in fact certainly would not see it as a glass. They don't have this concept. So anyway, that's getting into Mahayana epistemology. But so that this non-self, that there's no self-nature, there's no glassiness that makes it a glass. And this is kind of the opposite, I believe, of Plato, idealism, where this glass is an instantiation of the reality of glassness, and the water in the glass is an instantiation of the true nature of the ideal nature thing called waterness. This is the opposite of that. There is no waterness, there is no glassness, there is that. But in non-self, there's still the glass and the water. They just have no self-nature. And emptiness is no glass, no water. I mean, here it is. I'm holding it. I'm drinking from it. Right? Someone else just drank, presumably, coffee or tea, right? So yeah. So that's so emptiness is not, I see the three as pointing to different aspects of reality. And some people see emptiness as a kind of substrate of all existence. Like emptiness is almost like a substance, but emptiness itself is empty. And since this is not a class in the Mahayana, I'm not going to say much more about emptiness, but emptiness itself is empty. And it's if you try to wrap your head around it in language that's made out of nouns and verbs, it's really hard to do, because it's basically cutting through that. And also, no self is kind of cutting through that also, although it's a little more amenable to being talked about. But anyway, so yeah, that's a really great question. And now I've talked about no self, which I said I want to talk about later, so I've talked about that. I think the next question says, did I read it right? It says at some point there is no, quote, essence. Does it mean no concept of essence or really no essence, that I'm lost? What is my true self? Or maybe I misread it. I'm not sure what it is. And let me see. Okay, the person who asked that question, do you want to say more about your question? Or did we say enough about it already? Or can't hear you if you're...
Well, I'm not sure where I read it. It must have been in the 3 marks. And because I read the text a while ago, but I think it's in the 3 marks when it says...
Is it Compass of Zen you're talking about?
No, in the text, the excerpt that you asked us to read.
Oh, okay.
I made the list. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I read it correctly, but no essence. For me, it was no concept of essence, because we limit what it is by using a concept.
Mm-hmm.
But
also no essence.
In the sense of no self, as you describe it. Okay.
Yeah. And the question, what is my true self? Well, if I answered that, it would be wrong. Because you can't answer that. You have to ask that. What is my true self? What is my true self? I have to cut through. So that's how that goes. Okay. So there's a question, is there an ethical role for discernment? And I'm not sure what you mean by discernment. So could you say what that is?
Yeah, so let's see. I was looking at the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, and there's a lot of talk about discernment in that. And I probably need to read it more closely and carefully, but it just seems to me that the teachings advocate for openness, presence to what is.
Oh, I see where it is. Vision arose, insight arose, discernment arose, knowledge arose, illumination arose with me with regard to things never heard before. This is the noble truth of stress. Vision arose, insight arose, etc. Discernment arose, etc. This noble truth of stress is to be comprehended, and then etc. This noble truth of stress has been comprehended. Okay, I see what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You don't have to focus on discernment here. Vision doesn't mean with your eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's mental. So vision, insight, discernment, knowledge, illumination. So these all have ethical consequences. And one of the very interesting things about Buddhism generally is that, so in European cultures, intellectual cultures, you have ontology, which is how things are. You have epistemology, which is how we think things are. And you have ethics, which is how to act. And these are seen as separate. But in Buddhism, they're absolutely not separate. So if you have true insight, if you have true discernment, if you have true wisdom, then you will act ethically. And how things are and how we think they are, you can't separate them. So it's very different in Buddhism. There's always a very strong ethical component to anything in Buddhism. And in fact, traditionally, if you have a traditional monastic training, at least in the Mahayana, I don't know about the Theravada, but I suspect it's the same. The first few years of your training, you do very little meditation. You mostly work. You know, you cook, you clean, you get hardly any sleep, you're yelled at all the time, and it's in your, so the point is you have to develop your ethics. You have to give up your putting yourself first. You have to really see yourself as at the service of the community that you're in, and then you can start to meditate. That otherwise meditation, as it is in our culture, is often seen as a way of self-improvement, and it's not about self-improvement. So first you have to have the ethical grounding, the grounding in your behavior towards your community, and then you can start meditating.
Thank you. That's very helpful and has led to the thought arising in my mind of Zen as a religion of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to clarify that about discernment, because that's how we make ethical decisions, is discerning, using that capacity of discernment for ourselves and what we observe. We just need to make sure that we're not bringing our stuff into it, that we're seeing clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So then there's a question about the origination of stress, the craving that makes, this is from the Wheel of Dhamma in Motion, from that sutta, the craving that makes for further becoming, and after the last birth, no further becoming. What is meant by becoming? Rebirth. And of course the question is, who is it that is reborn? So there's no little marble that bounces around from human body to human body. So the real question about rebirth, whether you believe in it or don't believe in it, the question is, what is it that is reborn? That's really the question. And what is it that could be reborn? This is the what am I? What is your true self? That's really what's important. But yeah, so this is a culture that assumes, Buddhism arose in a culture that assumed rebirth. And so it makes it into all the old texts. There's an assumption that there is rebirth. So that's what it's talking about. So the cessation of being born, the end of the wheel of life and death, the wheel of Dharma in motion. There's a question, what is Pali? Oh, Pali, P-A-L-I. It's a language. It's so the Theravada suttas were written in Pali, or spoken in Pali and then written down, P-A-L-I. And then the Mahayana sutras were written in Sanskrit, and then translated into various languages. And sometimes only the translation into Chinese survives. And sometimes there are things that maybe were actually written in Chinese and then back translated into Sanskrit to make them look authentic. So that's what Pali is. Polly wants a cracker. No, it's not that Polly, nor is it polyester. Okay, thank you.
Can I follow on that briefly?
Yeah.
In the readings that were associated with the webpage of your center, are the items in parentheses then Pali, or are they Sanskrit, or how does that work?
Well, I don't know which webpage you're talking about, but since we're Zen and we're part of the Mahayana, they would be Sanskrit. Okay.
Okay.
And I should say that Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived, if indeed he lived, 2,600 or so years ago, spoke neither Pali nor Sanskrit, just as Jesus did not speak Greek. So these texts were written down centuries, many centuries later. And there used to be a claim that the Theravada Suttas were earlier than the Mahayana Sutras, but modern scholarship says no, they probably arose at about the same time. But one arose in Pali and one arose in Sanskrit. So that's kind of the latest on that. Okay, so now we have a question. Oh, this is a good question. Does that mean that love for another person does not need to be desire for the other person, for it can be as necessary as drinking water? My husband and I, telling secrets, last night, we were going to sleep and we were saying, I love you, I love you. And then I said, I don't know what love means. I really don't. Because, like, our culture is so like there's this desire, like I want this person, right? Well, we've been married for 43 years. So we've had each other at that time. So how can you want something you already have? But anyway, but so there's this idea of wanting, and then there's this idea of control, like parents, I love you, and therefore you, to their kids, and therefore you can't do that, right? There's this notion of control that comes into love. If you love me, you won't do that to me, right? So the notion of love it's a word, and it has all these meanings, and these meanings don't always support each other, So I don't know, love is necessary. I mean, you have two human beings, and how do they relate to each other? And maybe you want to call the way they relate to each other love. And maybe you don't want to call that love. But how do you relate to the people you're with? And then you have this abstract idea of love, like I'm lonely, I want to love somebody. And yeah, that's I don't want to put that down, because if you're lonely, that's really difficult. And there is this human need for connection, and it all gets so messed up with the ego and everything like that. Just that's in our school we have this teaching of not for me. My life is not about satisfying my desires. Not for me. So if you really live that not for me, then you love everything and everybody. That's the real spirit of love. It's not about you. That's what I want to say. Okay. So then we have a question which is basically the second seal and the second mark. The seals and the marks are different. We already talked about that a little bit. Then we have this question, Bodhisattva path versus the Arhats. Is there really a difference? So I should explain to people who might not know. So in the Mahayana Buddhism, the sort of goal is the Bodhisattva path, the path to become a Bodhisattva. And what a Bodhisattva is, this is a person who lives their life for others. Basically, that's what a Bodhisattva is. And the Arhats, that's the goal in the Theravada tradition. And the Arhats have attained enlightenment. And in the if you're a Bodhisattva, you attain enlightenment, but you keep being reborn because you want to help all beings. Whereas Arhats, you attain enlightenment, you stop being reborn. Is there really a difference? I don't know. I mean, people make stuff up all the time, and then they can argue about it. Oh, a Bodhisattva is better than an Arhat. No, an Arhat's better than a Bodhisattva. I mean, you just have different cultures, and they, make these different things. And, as has already been pointed out, ethics is absolutely essential to all these paths, to how we live. How do we live with each other? That's essential. And whether you want to call somebody an arhat or whether you want to call somebody a bodhisattva, I mean, you know, this is why the Mahayana call themselves the Mahayana. We're so much greater because we're not about arhats. We're about bodhisattvas, you know. But you look at how people live their lives. It was very interesting for those of you who read What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula, which is absolutely written centrally from a Theravada perspective. I mean, he was a Theravada monk. And he's always talking about ethics. Always. He's always talking about, you know, compassion for people, kindness for people. You know, the Pali word is metta, this loving kindness, right? And then in Mahayana, you talk about compassion. You're going to argue about loving kindness and compassion. You're going to do that? Why do that? You know, just how are you with other people? What is your actions? What is your direction? What are your motivations? In that moment, are you thinking about yourself or are you thinking about who's around you? You know, that's, and they're both the same, you know? So, yeah. Yeah, so it's just all propaganda, you know? So I wouldn't worry about that. Are there any other questions?
Judy, this is Rusty. Hello.
Yeah.
A quick question, I think. So this idea that we do not have self-nature, but we have consciousness. I mean, the way that we can even speak about these concepts is through consciousness, correct? And that we agree on these terms and the language so that we can discuss this topic today. Does that mean if we have no self-nature, that our consciousness is not actually ours, that we have some sort of shared consciousness, which I guess it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I think we all maybe see things differently. I mean, we do agree on things. That's how we know we have a consciousness. The sky is blue. We all say that's blue. I don't know how these fit together. No self-nature and the idea of consciousness.
Okay. Is there anything you say, we have consciousness? As if consciousness is something you own? And what is this we of which you speak? Also, it's very interesting that you say the sky is blue. We all agree the sky is blue. So, little known fact, blue was one of the last words to enter the language, one of the last color words to enter any human language that we know, that we can track. So blue is actually a relatively modern concept. Now, everybody looking at the sky on a sunny day, whether it's now or 5,000 years ago, presumably their eye receptors reacted the same way, all the little cones or however it works, and then the signals to the nerves, presumably that's exactly the same. But to have the word blue, that is actually new. So I'm so glad you chose that as an example because it shows how arbitrary all of this is. Okay? Yeah. And you've seen me talk about this before because you come to, you know, the fingers of the hand, right? So my consciousness, Rusty's consciousness, Lisa's consciousness, Jimmy's consciousness, right? Okay? Right? All different, all connected. All right? So yeah, so this notion of mine, it's actually much more permeable than we realize. And there's this wonderful saying that the absolute and the relative are not distinct. So in the absolute, all these consciousnesses are not separated, and in the relative, when I look at my screen, I see something different than when you look at your screen. Okay.
So,
Judy, I
Judy,
have to leave in a minute, and you didn't mention my question. I have to leave in like a minute.
That's right. Okay, I have to talk about the Heart Sutra. Yes, the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra negates all of this stuff. Well, not all of it, but a lot of this stuff. In particular, the line in the Heart Sutra: no suffering, no origination. No suffering, no origination, no no path, something I'm forgetting. I say this 1,000 times a year. So the Heart Sutra is actually negating all of these four things, and the Heart Sutra it negates the 12 links in the chain of origination. It negates, all. It basically negates everything, and so it's like this stuff is underlying everything, and then the Heart Sutra negates all of it, even if it doesn't explicitly negate it. Carol, is that what you wanted?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Have a great
Bye.
day. Okay. Yeah. So, anything else that people want to ask about?
Judy, you just mentioned the absolute and the relative.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering then, as they're intertwined in a sort of yin-yang way, so too would the particular and universal.
Yes, absolute and relative is the same as particular and universal. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Or actually, absolute and relative is the same as universal and particular.
Yes, more correct.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, Judy, this is Jen again. It's another nomenclature question.
Okay.
On the website, I guess it's Quantum Schools of Zen of the Americas. When they call it the Pali Canon, does that mean all of that actually came as a package in Pali?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you have the Pali Canon, and then you have the Mahayana Canon.
But was it that one was in the language of
Pali,
as opposed to like a Sanskrit
or Chinese?
Yeah.
Some of the Sanskrit sutras, we don't have the Sanskrit, we only have the Chinese. And some of them, particularly the Heart Sutra, is one that is often thought to be written in Chinese and then back translated into Sanskrit. So, yeah.
Right. Okay.
But those languages are very related, right? I mean, if you read the words are very similar, just maybe sometimes the Pali doesn't have too many R's and things like that. So instead of karma, it's kama, right?
Yes, that's right. Dharma, Dhamma. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're very closely related. And
thanks for that insight. That's really helpful.
Yes, Stan, who actually knows some Sanskrit, could maybe say more about it if he wants to run in here and say more about it, but maybe he'd rather not. I'll let him send us. Stan, if you want to say something, send us something in the chat so we can see your wisdom. But he's not responding. Okay. Anything else?
One last question. I think it was the Wheel of the Dharma reading. There they mention 3 round 12 permutation, knowledge, and vision. So that's another kind of these basic kind of concepts or precepts thing that I just didn't show up, or is it combined from these marks of existence, paramitas, and all of these other things?
Extremely subtle. What it is you have the 4 noble truths, and then you perceive it. This is the noble truth, and I like that they translate it stress instead of suffering. I really like that. So this is the noble truth of stress. This noble truth is to be comprehended, has been comprehended. I actually, put a little yellow marker to because it's very confusing, and they're not actually permutations, which as a mathematician, it bothers me that this, use this notion of permutation in the notes for it. So you have the Four Noble Truths, and then each one is multiplied as this is. It is to be comprehended in the future. It has been comprehended. Okay, so that's what it is. There it is. You're supposed to understand it. Now you understand it. Okay, so it's this multiplying the 4 by the 3. I should say that Buddhism in general, and especially Theravada Buddhism, is just nuts about counting things. I mean, you notice what we had. We had the 3 marks of existence. We had the 4 noble truths. We had the eightfold path, the 12 links in the chain of dependent origination. And there's actually, if you go, I will show you the Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism, which thank God you can get online because it, as a web text, because it literally weighs 5 pounds. I weighed it. This is supervised by Robert Buswell, who is a great scholar of Korean Buddhism in particular, Mahayana Buddhism in general, and Donald Lopez, who is a great scholar of Vajrayana Buddhism, and a staff of thousands. And they actually have a list of lists somewhere in here. Oh, yes, the list of lists. And these are very small type on very large pages. The list of lists starts on page 1065, which gives you an idea of why this book weighs 5 pounds, and ends on page 1102. So we have 37 pages of lists. It starts with the 1 vehicle, goes on to the 2 accesses or entrances, 2 accumulations or equipments, 2 aspects of esoteric, etc. And it ends with the 100 Dharmas of the Yogacara school.
That helps them remember them, right, Judy? They didn't get to write it down. They had to carry it in their head.
Well, that's true, but I don't know. Could you remember the 100 dharmas of anything?
Yes, I can remember the periodic elements of the table.
Oh, I am really impressed.
I'm trained as a chemist. Like, that's my thing, right? So
thank you. Great.
If you know how many you're missing, that if you know the total, you can know when you're missing one. That's what I think.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Anyway, yeah, so you have all these lists, and there are lots of them. 14 indeterminates, or 14 unanswerable questions. This is really cool. Is the world eternal? Is the world not eternal? Is the world both eternal and not eternal? Is the world neither eternal nor not eternal? That gets you to the tetralemma, which is for another class. Is the world, A, not A, and not A, not A, or not A? Okay. Is the world endless? Is the world not endless? So we have these permutations. The world both endless and not endless. The world neither endless nor not endless. So that's another foursome. The Tathagata, that's the Buddha, exists after death. Not exist after death. Both exist and neither exist nor not exist after death. And then we have 2, so that makes 12. And then, are the life force and the body identical? Are the life force and the body different? I wonder why it stopped there. Anyway, so we got all of this stuff, and there is a certain arbitrariness to a lot of these lists. Like, I don't know if we'll do a class on the 12 links of the chain of dependent origination, because in some sense it's kind of a sidestepping of things, but sort of, I don't know what to say. It's maybe too much thinking, but there's a certain arbitrariness to these 12 links and to the order in which the 12 links are given. And so there's a kind of arbitrariness, like the particular 5 hindrances, sleep, food, sex, wanting to be liked, and I've left something out. Maybe you remember what I left out. Food, sex, sleep. Money. Yeah. So these 5 hindrances. Why these 5? Why not 6? Why not 4? Even desire, anger, and ignorance, which seem so fundamental. You can say, why only those 3? Or why those 3? Maybe people have arguments. No, it's ignorance. Ignorance is the one that underlies all the rest. No, desire. Desire underlies all the rest. Nobody ever says anger underlies all the rest, but anyway. So there's a certain arbitrariness to these lists, but Buddhism loves lists. They got so many lists. Renee, did you want to say something? Are you unmuted or? Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry. I thought I didn't see you on your screen. I thought you were unmuted. Is there anything else? So thank you very much for this class. Is there anything else so we can? Jen just, yes.
One last question. What are the 5 clinging aggregates?
I'd have to look them up.
Okay, that's at the end of the
What?
or part of that wheel of Dharma, I believe.
Oh, it's form, feeling, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. That's the skandhas. Yeah, that's the skandhas.
The cravings.
No. No, this is ontology and epistemology coming together. So form, shape, right? Physical makeup. Feelings, which is feelings not in the sense of emotional feelings, but sort of. I already talked about this. Where was it? Sensation. So feelings in the sense of sensation, and perceptions, which is like naming things. This is a glass of water. Okay. So, and then form, feeling, perceptions, impulses, which is not being impulsive, but the thing that makes you pick up the glass of water. Okay. And then consciousness. So this is our human reality is made of these 5 things. So form, feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. And you notice I say it the way we chant in the Heart Sutra. I don't say forms, feelings, perceptions. I say forms, feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness, because we chant it that we know, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, that which is form is emptiness, that which is emptiness, form. The same is true of feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you. Thank you for all the participants for great questions and discussions. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.